Good morning. How's everybody doing? How people feel equals how they perform. And I find that this statement will divide people into three different camps. So I'm going to be curious to see how that breaks down in this room today. There are the people that automatically are like, yes, I agree with that. I already knew that. Show of hands, who's in that camp? Nice. Okay, I'm preaching to the choir today, apparently. Then there are the folks who say, maybe, but show me the data, tell me more. Who's in that camp? I like it. I like the honesty, I like the skepticism. And then we have the people who say, feelings are not for work, and this is all fluff. Anyone? Anyone? Okay. You're my dude today. Because I love the people who are disbelievers, because when they become true believers, there's just amazing impact in terms of what we can create with work cultures. And today, that is exactly what I'm going to talk about, how each and every one of you can build a culture of amazing competitive advantage through people. So I chuckled a bit when I saw that I was listed on the program to talk about workplace trends. I'm not big on trends. A trend today often becomes a mistake tomorrow. And today I'm just going to be sharing what I know works, and it's based on the immutable characteristics that are embedded in our human DNA. So we'll take a quick look. Our roadmap here, we're going to take a quick look at some stats, because it's useful to remind ourselves that, yeah, there's real results from culture beyond just the fluff advice that you hear all the time. And then we're going to use Maslow's still excellent hierarchy of needs as a shorthand model to translate culture elevation. And we're going to weave that concept throughout, and I'll share some tips and stories. And then we'll dig into the neuroscience of why it pays to create an environment of well-being that turns your culture into a profit center. And then I'll explain where you should focus and invest to get all this good stuff flowing, including the number one most transformational thing that most companies never do. And then we'll wrap up with some powerful visual takeaways to keep these topics easily mentally accessible, because everybody's drinking from an information fire hose these days. So it seemed appropriate to throw in a little talking heads. Well, how did I get here? So we're going to talk about the brains today quite a bit. So these are my contact details, my LinkedIn QR code. Please connect with me if we have not already. Why am I here? How did I get here? Why should you listen to anything I have to say? So for whatever reason, I was born with a set of cheat codes about people. I intuitively understood the inner workings, why they behave the way they do, and as I got older, I started to understand why. It is a superpower for me. And I used to assume it was one that everyone has, and I've come to realize that it's not that common in the general population, and it's not that common in HR professionals either. So it kind of makes sense when you see some of the low employee engagement numbers that we see. I can look back and see that as a kid growing up around some kind of emotionally volatile individuals, I used this methodology to create a safer environment. Influence mood, to influence behavior, to influence results. Early on in my career, I worked in non-HR roles. I had no mandate around people and culture. I just did what I'd always done. I created the environment that I wanted to be in. And then I watched as the change rippled outward from me. It had multiplicative positive impact. So then HR and I kind of found each other, and once I was in charge of that function, I started connecting the corporate mission to the HR operations, and I added in the human element, that intersection of our evolution, the neuroscience, and the psychology that explains what goes on between our ears. And I noticed that what really moved the needle was not the operational stuff. It wasn't how well I executed on payroll, It wasn't how skillfully I handled a legal issue. And it clearly wasn't how cleanly I could terminate employees. The game changer was creating a culture where people felt so valued that regardless of the exact number they were paid. The game changer was creating a culture that was so positive, legal issues basically disappeared. The game changer was creating a culture with feedback and transparent communication that lifted performance, or it helped employees self-select out. So I discovered that the intuitive habit that I'd had since I was a kid, influence mood, to influence behavior, to influence results, had massive business impact. So when I left corporate HR and started my business, it was pretty obvious where I should focus. People, the engine of success. They are driving your systems, your tech, all the work that gets done in your business. And yet, people themselves are the most complex tech of all. They are beautifully messy. And they are also the catalyst of culture. Now, what do I mean by that? We need to flip our script of what culture really is. You can have all the good stuff, the beautifully decorated office, the fancy coffee machines, the comfortable beanbag chairs. All that frippery that many people mistake for culture, that's not culture. Because just one jerk, especially one that's in an influential role, can ruin it. And then unfortunately, your culture sucks. Because remember, your culture is only as good as the worst behavior that you tolerate. Because it is the people, it's their behaviors, their interactions, the relationships that they produce, and the feelings that spring from all of that. The people are the culture. We keep getting this backwards. So your culture is a living, breathing organism. It is an ecosystem because it is made up of living, breathing organisms, people. They're the plants in the garden, and what you're creating with culture is the environment that they're living in, the air quality, the soil health, the levels of hydration, the sunlight. And the ratio of those elements is what determines if your people are either just surviving or really thriving. So we need to think about seed, feed, and weed. Seeding is building your employer brand as a push and pull factor to help you attract, hire, and promote mission-aligned people, and letting the wrong ones, again, self-select out. Feeding is nurturing and developing the people holistically to support all of this. And weeding means being willing to prune what can't be healthy in your environment. We are not meant for everyone, and everyone is not meant for us. And now, here's what I love about this. Other companies, your direct competitors, whoever, they can copy your product, your process, your pricing, they can use the same systems and tech, but your culture ecosystem is 100% unique to you. No one can imitate it exactly because it's all about the different individual people in your company and the interactions between them. All of your cultures are different. If you visited each other's office spaces, your workspaces, every single one would be different. And that's awesome, because it's the secret sauce. And when we link that secret sauce to the human brain science, we start creating this sticky syrup of bond between employer and employees, and that becomes an amazing source of competitive advantage. Not just because it's unique, but because employees inherently know that great culture is rare. So the gentleman that brought us management by objectives. Now, obviously, everyone knows his most famous quote, but I also love these other two lesser-known ones. Results are obtained by exploiting opportunities, not by solving problems. Now, we can quibble a little bit about that because a lot of you sitting here today have been successful precisely because you solve problems. But what I mean when I say this is that we keep collecting data, we measure it to death, and we compare it over time. And yet, all we're doing is treating the symptoms that it represents. In most cases, we are not getting to the root causes of our people problems. And that's a terrible shame, because that's where the real transformative opportunities live. That's the disruption that we need. The best way to predict the future is to create it. You, as employers, have the power to create a deep culture that is so good that it shifts the people predictives. And that's the next best thing to having a crystal ball. So I've said all these lovely things about people and culture, but don't mistake me for fluffy. If you noticed, I named my business the HR Realist Idealist because I wrap my methodology in proven business realities and results, basically. So let's talk about a few of the mistakes that I see a lot of business leaders making. Please stop trying to be all things to all people. You can't. It is okay to be clear on your values and stay true to your mission. Don't twist yourselves into pretzels. Although, can we just talk about how good those pretzels were last night? Toxic positivity is where we lean so hard into the positives that we refuse to acknowledge any negatives. Ignoring the bad squashes the good, and it breaks trust with your employees, and it diminishes respect. Not being able to make tough or unpopular decisions because we get stuck too much in the caring side of things, that's ruinous empathy. We can't accommodate every single employee preference, personal preference, or demand. It will kill your business. My latest peeve, which I've named irresponsible inclusivity. So we went from the ick of the CYA blame culture, and now we swung the pendulum completely in the opposite direction, where it's kind of a big kumbaya fest. And while I love the notion, the ethos of we're all in this together, yes, when it comes to, there's some situations where accountability still matters, and putting this into practice appropriately can be a real challenge. If everyone's responsible, then no one is. So I already talked about I'm not a huge fan of trends, right? And social media and business publications, that's all they do. They put that out all day. It's basically, clickbait. Now, I'm not going to say don't pay attention to trends. Can't stick our heads in the sand. But you need to assess them with a discerning eye. View them all with some healthy skepticism. Think about where they're coming from. What's the agenda? What's trying to be achieved? And judge if the trend fits with your business and if it will benefit you in the short term and the long term. Because I got to say, we've all watched a lot of the broken promises, the layoffs, the bad things that have sprung up in the last few years from the short-term thinking that big global companies have made, and it's really hurt people. So obviously, all these things, and this is not an exhaustive list. We could talk all day about the great effects that culture can bring to us. And of course, for many of the things that increase, the inverse will be true. If we're improving retention, for example, then we're reducing our turnover costs. But the one I want to really pay attention to today is employee engagement, because it's the place where all things spring from. It is the fountainhead. Your culture is a profit center. Please start thinking about it this way. I cannot stress this enough. If we are maximizing our positive inputs and reducing the negative ones, we're going to move that P&L. Yes, please? So there's some interesting numbers here, and there's always a little bit of play. Like if you had a lean, tight hiring process, maybe you're not going to capture 50%. And I have clients where it depends on how strongly an initiative is supported to get a little play there. But this number, the Gen Z prioritizing culture over salary at 69%, that is a shocker. So even if you don't believe in this stuff, you better care about it, because they do, and it's not going away. So this is such an opportunity, if you lean into the things I'm talking about today, to really set yourselves up as an employer of choice. I also love the gut check of the employee net promoter score. Now, it usually gets defined as would your employees recommend your company to others. But I like to say to their family and friends, because that's really where the rubber meets the road with the people that they care about. So culture is obviously a 360 dynamic. We know this. We need to keep this top of mind and view it this way, that your employees are your internal customers. So what you're building with them in terms of culture is what then goes outward externally to your customers. So this is the virtuous cycle that we want. We want positive employees who are delivering better service, that are improving your customer experience and boosting your employer brand. and all the lovely numbers that come with that behind the scenes. So the latest Gallup annual State of the Workplace report. So employee engagement globally has dropped to 21%. These are terrible numbers, terrible. $438 billion in lost productivity last year. I mean, and when we look at that 21%, it's not clear, like, who's super engaged, who's kind of engaged, who's teetering on disengaged. And the decline, by the way, was entirely with managers. It fell from 30% to 27%. And the biggest decline was with managers under the age of 35. The baseline of employees who are not managers, that engagement number is at 18%. That is terrible. After measuring this for 25 years, yes, we've made some improvements, but it's plateaued, and it doesn't look like things are changing anytime soon. So I want to show you how we can do this better. Maslow's lovely hierarchy of needs, which he put out in 1943, but I don't care what anyone says, this is still beautifully relevant, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel, or, in this case, the pyramid. But I think we can all agree on this much-needed update. Thank you, I got jokes. So I've used this as a template to overlay the elements that we need to successfully implement the elements that are going to elevate our culture. So now, if you've only fulfilled the needs at the bottom of the pyramid, then that's where your culture is currently sitting. So elevating it means implementing what needs to happen to fulfill the next step above, and so on and so on. And when you do that, boom, you elevate it. So then that's the level that it sits at. And obviously, we want to lift it to the highest levels possible because, like any good investment, it is going to pay us back. So if we look, I grouped those bottom two together because to me they're intertwined and they're table stakes. Like, please tell me that everyone here is, paying at or a little bit above market, that you're offering good benefits, that you have fairness in your workplaces, that you're following all the rules for your jurisdictions, et cetera. I mean, those are the basics. Now, we know that job security is really never guaranteed, but employees should have a reasonable expectation that if they meet expectations, they stay employed. I see so many companies that use reductions in force like as the wind blows, and that is so unfair and it will kill your culture stone dead. But in regards to safety, I can't not mention the big bad boogeyman who's living under everyone's bed these days. Oh, Mr. AI, look how handsome he is. So the latest Pew numbers from February, people are worried. Now, obviously, AI it's here, it's been here, it's gonna be here even more so, and everyone wants more, better, faster, all the things. But this is something relevant that all companies need to consider. Uncertainty breeds anxiety and it kills safety. So be as transparent as you can about your plans for your AI adoption and get your employees involved whenever possible, because that way you'll get better buy-in and better implementation and not silent sabotage. And I will mention, is Stefan still here? No? In the presentation or the panel that he was in yesterday, he said some great things about, the melding of the human element with AI. And I'm sitting there like, yes, I want to root for that. But there's realities, and I think we all need to understand that with all the good things that are going to come with AI, there will be some not so good things that are going to come with it. And we already know that. I know it and you know it. And do you know how you know it? Because you're carrying around a little rectangle 24/7 that you're addicted to, that connects you with more people in more places than ever in the history of humanity. And yet, every time data is collected, people feel more unhappy and more disconnected than they ever have. Because technology is great for adding convenience to our lives, but it doesn't really add anything real. So looking at that middle section of the pyramid, I define that as valuing employees for who they are as people. And this is a two-pronged piece. So we create belonging not just by accepting, which that's such a gross word, as though like you're settling, you're being forced to acquiesce to something. I like to say it's welcoming people for who they are, as they are right now, and valuing them for that, and fostering strong social connections between your employees, using fun, humor, friendship. I can't tell you how many times I would have an employee tell me, I have an offer from competitor X, and it's for more money, but I can't leave. My friends are here, we've created something special here. That's real. And there's another element to this. We need to go beyond just the transactional nature of the employer-employee relationship, the contract that says, you provide me with work and I give you money. Just last week, I was meeting with a potential new client. He was like, I don't get that. What does it mean? And I said, okay, you mentioned you're married, right? Yes. So what if your wife only valued you for how much money you bring in? You got it real quick. Because when money is the only bond in the employment relationship, people will always leave when there's more money elsewhere. So the balance of power is inherently unbalanced because employees know that the employer has all of the resources on their side. And I mean, that's just the way it is, but it creates a negative mental load for the employee. So it's like tying a rock around somebody's neck and throwing them in an Olympic swimming pool and saying, okay, compete for a gold medal. It doesn't work. So what I suggest is using physics, moving the fulcrum towards the employee. What does that mean? It means giving as much as we can on the things that we can. And yes, a lot of times that's not going to be salary. It's great when it can be. But it's, how flexible can you be? What are things that you can offer? What are things that you can give on? Because we talk about quiet quitting, and somebody brought it up yesterday. I kind of thought that concept was dead in the current economy, but we quiet quit on our employees all the time, as though, well, hey, the law says this, so that's what I offer. That's the bare minimum. That feels gross. So I get a lot of pushback on this sometimes, people who like to grumble. I don't want to do that. Okay, that's short-sighted thinking. Because when you do this, when you really do it, it's like making regular deposits in a savings account of goodwill. You're building organizational resilience and inoculating your employees against that gross, bare minimum, strictly transactional feeling. And I've seen how amazing this can be because when you really build up that bank balance, people will cut you so much slack. They will assume good intent, and they give back to you in the form of loyalty and engagement. So these are awesome things that we want. I like this Gartner infographic because it kind of encapsulates a lot of the things that employees are asking for. I will add a few caveats, such as radical flexibility. We can't always provide that, especially in the kind of business that you guys do. You can't always be like, yes, you're going to work whenever, wherever you want. Here they describe holistic well-being from the perspective of like employee benefits usage. Okay, yes, and I'm saying that when we build amazing culture, we're creating holistic well-being like beyond that. And it ties into these other elements, creating the deeper connections with the employees, between each other, between the managers, and so on. And what that does, because shared purpose is a big deal nowadays, and a lot of especially the younger people, they're looking for it in their work. But let's be honest, sometimes your first job is not your calling in life, or even your second or third job as you're still figuring it out. Sometimes you just need a job. So when we can really foster these deeper connections that make people feel that something special is going on, a lot of times that's enough of a shared purpose, feeling a part of something bigger. And when we do that, and then we invest in our employees in terms of caring about their personal growth, that little rocket emoji is very, very appropriate. So let's talk about this fun stuff, the neuroscience, brain hacking to power employee performance. Okay, I would like you all to just drink this in. Let's spend a moment here. According to the National Science Foundation, in an average day, for all of us, 95% of our thoughts are repetitive and 80% are negative. Now, if I showed you numbers like that on anything else, that your data was going to be breached, that your systems were going to crash, that your building would burn down, you would want to put in some mitigation factors, would you not? Like, you would want to fix this problem. And yet, we don't do this. And I have to think it has something to do with the fact that a lot of people don't understand that it's possible to do something about this, but it is. So pardon the pun, but this is a no-brainer. So let's dig in. 4 key brain chemicals for well-being, the happy brain chemicals. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. And there's such lovely interplay between these things because if you're releasing dopamine in a situation where, for example, the brain is connecting that to some type of trust, you're going to release oxytocin. And that is a bonding chemical. And we want to create that employer-employee bond as much as possible. But for our purposes, it's useful to understand that of the 4 of these, the one that's the most easily and consistently available, accessible to the employer is dopamine. So this graphic is like the chicken and the egg. We experience a feeling, and then we instantaneously attach a thought to it. And often, it's a feeling thought pattern that's been with us for a long time. It's probably negative. It's been repeating over and over. But what's miraculous is that when you realize what Dr. Sangaretti says here, and this man's a cardiologist, but he knows what's up. If we realize that human thoughts can secrete natural chemicals, and if drugs are just artificial chemicals, then thoughts become natural drugs. So it's obvious that thoughts would make great medicine. And this concept, even if you just take this away for yourselves today, this is life-changing stuff. Like, you can actually change your feelings by changing your thoughts. And when you do that, it's a gift that you see the power of it, you want to give it to everybody. So, I've worked with some difficult people who did not believe in this stuff at first. It makes me laugh to remember one guy who said, "You know, Charity, I like being miserable. And all this positive stuff you do just leaves no room." And that is the point. Just like moving our P&L, we can crowd out those negatives by injecting more positives. So they did an amalgamation, a meta-analysis study, where they took over 200 different studies that were done all over the world about positivity and well-being. And in every metric, it improved success. Every category, you name it. If you worked in sales, you sold more. If you worked in accounting, you were more accurate. If you worked in IT, you got your stuff done quicker, whatever. It improves everything. It improves your collaboration, your creativity, all the things. And the creativity one is interesting in terms of this. One of the 200 studies was done on a group of doctors. And they broke them into 3 groups. One was the control group that was given nothing. Another was just given basic neutral medical statements to read. And the third group was given candy. And they were able to diagnose twice as fast and with even more creativity because they were less anchored. And here's the crazy part. They didn't even eat the candy because sugar makes us release dopamine, so they did not want that to affect the study. So, this is amazing stuff. Optimal performance comes from a brain in a positive state. Not from a neutral state, certainly not from a negative state, but not even neutral, positive. So if we see these results in something as life and death, as medical, why would we not lean in hard to implement it in our workplaces? And sugar is a great segue because we're going to talk about the science of your secret sticky sauce and how you're going to brew this up. Commit these 2 words to memory: dopamine microdosing. Now, why? This strategic implementation of small, frequent positives. Because the big stuff is few and far between. How often do you get, or are you able to give to your employees a raise, a bonus, a promotion? Not that often. So it's these small, consistent micro victories, these little wins. And we need to be having consistent positive interactions, because I think you probably all know that the minimum is 3 to 1. It takes 3 positive interactions to kind of neutralize 1 negative. Well, the golden ratio is 6 to 1. And I'm standing here talking about all this positive stuff, but I gotta tell you, a big part of culture is not letting the nonsense filter in. So you need to be having regular conversations that are constructive feedback. So that ratio may be even higher. We want to be building connections and unifying our teams around common goals and cultural artifacts. If anyone here is familiar with Shine's work on that, this sustains motivation and it's lifting achievement and boosting loyalty. And what's awesome about all of this is that when we're doing these things consistently, we're helping our employees regularly release the dopamine, and over time, it attaches to the thoughts and it's rewiring the connections in a more positive way. Like, this is amazing stuff. So we're going to do a little experiment. I'm kind of sad that we have less people today. So humor me. Everyone, stand up and get a partner. All right, is everybody partnered up? Okay, one person in the group, raise your hand. Okay, and turn towards each other. Okay, the person who is raising their hand, your job for the next few seconds until I say stop is to look into your partner's eyes and keep your face neutral and expressionless. And the job of the other person for the next few seconds, you can put your hands down, by the way. The non-hand raised person, your job is to look into your partner's eyes and smile. Ready? Go. Okay, well done. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you can all sit. You can sit. So you've just experienced the power of mirror neurons. That's what makes you wince when you see someone get hurt. It's why you'll laugh more in a group of laughing people than you will alone. And it's why babies smile back when you smile at them. And it is the ultimate fake it till you make it. Even if you're not happy, the act of smiling releases those happy chemicals into your brain. And when someone sees you smiling, those chemicals start flowing for them, and they almost cannot help themselves. They will smile too. And this even works in New York City, although I don't recommend doing it in certain situations. But so why do we care? Because emotions are contagious. Emotional contagion is a very real concept. When people spend time together, their neural activity will sync up. Within just 33 milliseconds, our brains can recognize the emotion of another person, and we will start to respond in kind, to mirror them. If you put 3 people in a room, the most emotionally expressive person will influence the others within just 2 to 3 minutes. So that will either be a positive, or it can be like breathing in toxic secondhand smoke. So your company already has its own emotional flavor. But do you know what it is? And could it be better? So we're getting up into the juicy parts of the pyramid here. There is amazing power in letting people know that we see what makes them special, what truly makes them them. Has anyone here ever seen Dr. Susan David's TED Talk? No? Ooh, highly recommend. So I'm going to apologize to any of the South Africans here because she is South African, and she starts her talk with a traditional greeting, Sawubona, which means I see you. And by seeing you, I bring you into being. Now, that is a remarkably beautiful thing that each of us hopefully has experienced in our lives. Don't we all have memories of the people who really saw us, who saw what made us special, and helped us see it too, and helped us realize how we contribute to the world? I know I felt it a day a leader I worked for said, "I've never known any HR professional who can do the magic that you do with people." Ooh, got me right in the feels. So how can we bring this beautiful thing into our workplaces? Okay, I added this slide at the end of last week. I was going to use a different example for esteem because I'm trying to give you a broad helicopter overview of these concepts and then pepper in, with the limited time we have, a few specific examples, and this is one. I was telling a new client about this thing that I did with a bear years ago, and he loved it so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to throw it in. So feel free to borrow it because I borrowed it. I had read about it somewhere a few years back. So I think that company used a stuffed elephant, but I used a stuffed superhero bear. Obviously does not need to be a bear. I put an apple here, because like if you worked for Apple, for example, whatever is a meaningful object to your organization just needs to be like small and portable enough to sit on a workstation. So I got this bear and I asked an employee, he was the first recipient, patient 1, patient 0, is that what we say? And I told him that he had to award the bear to a fellow colleague. But it had to be for something that he thought was awesome. Totally his choice, totally his opinion. And then that employee would get to choose the next recipient, and so on and so on. And what was amazing about this was how such a cheap and simple thing that I was a little afraid, to be honest, was going to be hokey, was one, amazingly popular, and two, like it did a bunch of amazing things. It was a powerful form of peer-to-peer recognition. It trained colleagues to look for the good in each other and shout it out. And we want those brain positives that are going to crowd out the negatives. It had a habit of prioritizing culture, which I did not expect, because the things that the employees thought were worthy of the bear were not the things like, hey, you hit this number or you hit this goal. They were almost always about the interactions and the characteristics that they had identified as special. It created pride because when someone had this bear on their desk, people would walk by and be like, hey, how'd you get the bear? And they got to retell the story, which released those chemicals again for them and for the person listening as they started to think about that we're in an awesome culture that recognizes people. Now, hopefully, this example will get your creative juices flowing, because you don't have to do this, but there's so many other simple, easy things that you could do to start creating an environment that feels unique to your organization. And so we talked about where would we invest? How do we get all this good stuff flowing? And probably not a surprise, it's going to be your managers. I mean, the biggest ROI is going to come from them. They are the culture caretakers. And with numbers like that, in terms of performance improvement, obviously this is the way to go. Because we talked about emotional contagion, just one influential individual can have such a big impact. It makes sense to focus on developing your managers to be those rock star individuals. Leaders bring the weather. And they are the human bridge. They're going to be the ones translating executive vision, connecting the strategy to the execution, converting the abstract into the actionable, and creating those important relational bonds. And this is a tall order. So how are you going to get it done? People are not necessarily inherently born with these skills. So again, from the Gallup data, so it's showing us that disgusting purple line of global engagement at 21%, and then the US is actually 10 points higher at 31. But this lovely blue line, that from when we started measuring it 20 years ago, with 52%, is now at 70. So this is best practice organizations. That's their engagement number. So this stuff is possible. And what Gallup did was ask these companies, okay, what do you do? What's different? And these are the 3 actions that they suggest. So we all understand the value of training for responsibilities when someone is promoted or hired into a management role. I think it definitely bears repeating, or maybe if you've heard it for the first time, the importance of stressing that when you become a manager, it's no longer about your results as an individual contributor, it's really about what you are getting from the team. And then they suggest teaching managers coaching techniques, which I think it's rare to have people in-house to train for that have those skills. This can be challenging to hit, so I would definitely suggest hiring someone like myself or whoever is going to be able to help get you there. And then 3, investing in manager development, which they define as adding skills around leadership, communication, mentoring, conflict resolution, and emotional intelligence. And now I say heck yes to all of these. They're great, but let's dig deeper into that last one. Emotional intelligence, the demand is expected to rise quite a bit in the next 3 to 5 years. Most CEOs believe that it will be the #1 future leadership skill. And here's what's interesting to me. There is no true emotional intelligence or developing into a great leader without really understanding ourselves. And let's be honest, most of us don't. Not really. And this last number, 95% of people believe they are self-aware, but only 10 to 15% actually are. I think we probably know that that's true. So how will we close this gap? What should we do? And it brings us to the top of our pyramid, the pinnacle. And this is the part that I get so excited about. But I also get really sad because it's the #1 thing that I mentioned that most companies won't do. And they usually don't understand it or the opportunities that open up if they invest in it. So fulfilling our potential and becoming the best version of ourselves. Deep self-understanding is like unlocking your owner's manual. And it's how we get intentional around creating results. So I do that by human locksmithing. This is my EQ model that I built, that I use. And so people will ask me, well, what does this entail? It's helping people understand their cognitive function stack, the way they take in information from the world and process it, and then how they make decisions in response to it. That's their hardware. Then you add in their software, which are the experiences that get uploaded over time throughout their life. And some of that stuff is so old, and it has never been upgraded. And it's that combination of the hardware and the software that results in their outward behaviors and how the world is experiencing them. But why do we care? Well, I've seen it over and over. For example, the manager who had an unfair standard for all the women on his team. And we might instantly assume an inherent gender bias, but it's really because growing up, his dad favored his sister, and he's resentful. Or the female executive who's driven to succeed at all costs, even ugly costs, because her parents attached her value to success all of her life, and she's still living out that script. Or the CEO that got promoted to be a CEO literally a year ago this month, who I've just watched over the last year, ignore excellent actionable advice and tons of relevant market data because they feel threatened by disagreement and anyone who knows more than they do. Oof. And now, that, my friends, is the ultimate manifestation of how people feel equals how they perform. And the stakes get really high. So I said we're going to wrap up with some powerful visual takeaways. We saw this one earlier. This is what we're building, right? This is our culture ecosystem that people want to be a part of, that they're thriving in, that's healthy, that we've capped off with our lovely elevated culture pyramid. And then we've added in our managers, who are our master gardeners. They're our culture caretakers. And we've developed them so that they can develop the people that work for us, that work for them. And they are using all that brain science to push and pull the motivational levers in order to get the best performance possible. And then we are taking all of that secret sticky sauce that we've created, And we're basically pouring it over the whole thing. We're creating those bonds between the employer and the employee that are irresistible. And I'll leave you with this. When we look at the triple bottom line, for me, the planet piece, yes, it represents climate and sustainability and all those great things, but it also signifies what ripples outward from each employee in our care, past, present, or future. The way the internal culture becomes the external culture. But instead of being that virtuous cycle that was a flat circle, it's a three-dimensional globe of our planetary impact. Now, I am super proud of the success that I have helped business leaders achieve, but the real wins that I prioritize, they look a little bit different. It's the wives or the husbands who thank me for giving them back a happy spouse who doesn't dread their work. Or the ex-colleagues who DM me to share that they've taken the lessons from our time together to build positive culture and to be catalysts for that, and how it's improved their professional lives. I think about the executive who says that the deep work we did transformed his career and his relationship with his kids. Or the CFO who finally stopped chasing the ghost that told her that money was all that mattered, and she isn't hated by her team anymore. And every holiday, when I get a lovely text from a very dear former colleague who insists that my cheat codes helped save his life, I am reminded of what a privilege it is to have positive impact on people and culture. That's my legacy. And now you all get to decide, what will yours be? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charity, for this amazing presentation. Do we have any questions? Oh, we do. Are you still ready to take them?
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, Charity. Very good presentation. So my question for you was on building the pyramid of your version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of organizations, especially in the BPO, were so KPI driven. So it's all about the numbers. How do we go about building our culture from the bottom up? And even more importantly, how do we judge the success at each level? Do we start from the top down, bottom up? Like, how do you go about in a short? Yeah.
Charity, a mic.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, it's a great question. A lot of people like to say, culture starts at the top. Well, of course it does. But a CEO or C-suite people, whoever, they're not experiencing the culture in the same way that the people down there are. Have you ever heard the expression, to the Queen of England, the world smells like fresh paint? Like, very different experiences. So, it has to be built kind of from the inside out at all levels. But what really matters is it doesn't matter what the people at the top think about the culture. It's everyone else. So, doing regular surveys, obviously a big annual survey, it's a heavy lift. You definitely should do them. Sometimes you can do them once every couple of years, but like pulse surveys are easy. 3 to 5 quick questions. Take the temperature of your people. And, you get a sense. I loved Neris, is she still here? She mentioned yesterday, when you walk into an office, a space that has great culture, you feel it. It's like somebody sprayed magic dust in the air. And it's this intangible thing, but you know it when you feel it. So it's very hard to kind of quantify these things. But, a lot of companies are adding culture metrics into their KPIs and basing, executive bonuses and things like that, for example, on driving these initiatives.
Charity, outstanding presentation. I've got a question linking back to a book that I've read many times, and I'm sure you have read as well, called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And in the book, Collins talks about in building strong teams, he uses the analogy of a bus, having the right people on the bus, but then making sure those people are in the right seats. In your career, when you've dealt with performance issues, how many times or what percentage of the time is it that someone is either not the right person to be on the bus or they're simply in the wrong seat? They're in the wrong role. They're set up to fail from day one. Is this something that you've seen regularly, and how can organizations ensure that people get in the right seats from day one?
Well, this is an amazing question, and no, I have not read that book, so I will need to do that. Thank you for the recommendation, Mark. But I think I'm in the minority in my school of thought on this, because yes, it's all about hiring the right people for the right job at the right time. Yes, we know that. But life is imperfect. It's messy. People are messy. And sometimes you got to work with what you got, which has been kind of the hallmark of my career. Like, if we have an island of misfit toys, how do we kind of create what's needed in the job functions around that? And companies are very inflexible and unwilling to do that. And of course, if you're a huge corporate behemoth, it makes sense. It's harder to turn that ship. But having that mindset of flexibility and agility and kind of letting the roles fit the individual, and that can be a challenge when people leave, but when you do the things I'm talking about, your turnover rate really decreases. So, there's a lot of ways to do this effectively and to kind of keep in mind future succession planning at the same time, because it's like a chess game. So, I don't know, did that answer your question? Okay, cool. We good?
Oh, one more. Charity, I think it was really interesting doing the experiment with the smiles. I definitely could not stop smiling. But I noticed here in Munich, I've been walking around. I am a New Yorker, by the way, and I do smile at people. But nobody smiles back here. So, exactly. So it's funny, but it's also, I wonder if even on the data that you showed, if there are cultural biases to the way we want to look at this. Like, I'm really surprised that the US is above a global number, but perhaps our measure is more American, and that's why it's lower, and actually people are happier, but it's just because we're measuring against an American standard.
I mean, I haven't dug deeply into the Gallup data. You certainly can do that to figure out, like, how exactly are they measuring it. I did look because I wanted to see, are they just looking at like Fortune 500s? No, apparently it's a nice broad group of different company sizes and different industries, et cetera. I think that's interesting because I've been smiling at people, Rita, and they smile back, so I don't know. But yes, No, but you're right. Culturally, it is, there's some differences there, but I do find that this works a lot, and there's a lot of data that supports that. But it's just so interesting because people almost always can't not smile. So it's such a simple, easy, free thing that all of us can do.